thanks everyone for joining us today. If you are new to the Albany Institute, we are New York's oldest museum, founded in 1791. Our collections document the Hudson Valley really as a crossroads of culture and history, influencing not just the region, but also the state and the nation at large. Our collection has more than 35,000 objects and 1 million documents actually in our research library. And our collections, our exhibitions, and our programs, such as these ones, really aim to give our community a sense of place and really to impart a sense of what the Hudson Valley played in the broader American stories and really our own place in history. So just to highlight a little bit about our collections, permanent collections include the Hudson River School, one of the largest in the country, History of Ancient Egypt, and it really showcases ancient Egyptian artifacts through the lens of the story as it relates to Albany and the capital region. Our collections also include paintings, sculptures, ceramics, metalworks, photography, documents, ephemera, and of course costumes, which is one of the more beloved collection areas. And in addition to our permanent exhibitions and collections, we also display temporary exhibitions that change approximately 3 times per year, including the current exhibition titled Americans Who Tell the Truth. This exhibition showcases a selection of portraits by a Maine-based artist named Robert Shetterly, and it features individuals throughout U.S. history who exemplify courageous citizenship and democratic ideals. Since 2002, Shetterly has painted 280 portraits, and our curator, whose name is Diane Shuchuk, she selected 42 of these. Many of the portraits have connections to the region. And so as you can imagine with this exhibition, it really presented ample opportunities for public programs, for community outreach, and for really engaging with other organizations whose missions really align with those of the subjects who are on display in the galleries. Namely, the reason that we're all gathered here today, we have included a portrait of John Muir, and I'm going to quickly share my screen so you can see that. Can everyone see that? Okay, great. So that's the portrait of John Muir that's on display now. And John Muir, of course, he was a conservationist, a naturalist, an explorer, and one of the founders of the Sierra Club. And so we're so excited to partner with the Sierra Club Atlantic chapter for this program today. And many thanks to Caitlin, who's here joining us here, for accepting kind of the initial invitation, just kind of my shot in the dark of what could be possible for this potential partnership. And of course, I want to thank our esteemed presenter today, Aaron Mair. And just a little bit about Aaron. Aaron first became a member of the Sierra Club in 1999 and has held more than 36 leadership positions within the Sierra Club's Mohawk, Hudson Mohawk group and the Atlantic chapter, including chapter chair from 2002 to 2003, chapter executive committee from 2002 to 2004, and environmental justice chair from 2009 to the present. Is that still the case, Aaron? To the present?
It certainly is.
And in addition, he was elected to the National Sierra Club's Board of Directors in 2014, and he formerly served as the Sierra Club's president. And so before I turn it over to Aaron, and I'll stop sharing here now, before I turn it over to Aaron, I just want to mention that I will be monitoring the chat. So as we're watching Aaron's presentation, be thinking of questions or any topics of discussion. Feel free to enter them into the chat and I'll moderate it, but there's also the opportunity, of course, if someone wants to turn on video and have a conversation directly with Aaron, we can do that as well. But in the meantime, if everyone could mute their Microsoft Teams, that way we can listen to Aaron uninterrupted. So with that, Aaron, thank you, welcome, and take it away.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and it's indeed an honor to present and celebrate and lift up and support the Albany Institute of History and Art. Not too many people know that it is as old. I think it might be older than the Smithsonian. I know that they are close in approximate ages, but few know that there was an entity to rival the Smithsonian. The only reason why we know the Smithsonian is because it's in the nation's capital versus New York State's capital. But the same collective spirit that's behind it as an institution, is the spirit that gave us the Smithsonian also gave us the Albany Institute. So there are all wonderful collections and things that are here. And again, also my support in all things Sierra Club. I want to thank Caitlin Ferrante and Roger Downs and the staff and team at the Atlantic chapter office who are doing a fabulous and wonderful job to not only protect the environment and wilderness, but public health. There's just not only just the various laws and protection, but also facilitating people's access to nature. Places like the wild spaces like the Catskills, the Adirondacks, the coastal Long Island. Again, this organization and the volunteers within this organization really keep the spirit of John Muir alive. And but more importantly, the complexities of John Muir, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of those details. You probably notice my initial point. Let me begin by sharing my screen if I can. Um, Let me see. Is it being shared?
Yep, that looks great, Aaron.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Um, but let me not do that. I don't need to see that. And I can expand this. First and foremost, um, I had to take a little bit of literary license, with John Muir. I mean, I love uh, the initial quote that's within that image, but you notice my talk is titled, Talk of a Thousand Mile, which is really a spin on John Muir's famous Thousand Mile Walk. And given the topic that we're going to talk a little bit about, Muir not only as the father of wilderness protection and the wilderness protection of movement and the father of the national parks, but also what is seldom talked about are the other forces and influences that acted upon him that made him the great and complex person that he was. And we've seen some of the challenges that the club has faced. And one of the things I like about when we talk about John Muir, we can give a linear history of the man and his contributions, but um, two things that John, well, one main thing that John hated was the word and thing of what he called hiking. And he said people ought to saunter in the mountains, not hike. And so my talk in that spirit will be a sauntering into some of his complexity and history and some of the things and how they are kind of relevant to this day. And so um, the picking of the thousand mile walk theme and the thousand mile talk is intentional because it goes right to the core of why he was, to his core, pro nature for nature's sake, and nature even at the expense, elevating it above, way above humanity. And people was one of the criticisms of people like Wendell Berry of the Sierra Club and its founder was that Wendell Berry again came with the thesis in the centrality of man within nature, and that Muir and the Sierra Club kind of removes man and humanity and mankind from nature and said it elevates it at a higher space. But you got to look at John Muir for who he was and what he was. Um, in that thousand mile turn journey, uh, not only did it bring him closer to nature, but it also closer in a eyewitness to the massive ecological destruction by man and mankind, man upon man. And oops, I think I have something sitting over here that I don't want to have sitting over there. Thank you. And he in 1867, when he made that journey, he saw the gaping wounds left behind of the Civil War. He traveled through what I call the smoking ruins of what is the South. He saw what industrialized destruction of mankind, not only from exploiting in nature, but destroying mankind and destroying nature in the process. These were backdrops and things that weighed heavily upon him, but also the institutional slavery. So not only what we're talking about the destruction of the war, but also the degradation of man and humanity. So this man, when he did that 1,000-mile journey, he tried to center on who his core and his purpose as a naturalist and a scientist, in that sense of when he was constantly, if you read the 1,000-mile walk, um, at least on four occasions, he was entreated by former Southern soldiers about uh, um, his perspective on the freeing of slaves, et cetera, et cetera. And he just basically kept reverting back. I'm a naturalist. I'm a scientist. Here are the things that I care about, and here's what I'm for. He really shuddered taking a position, but as a scientist, he was really the pinnacle observer. And in that journey, and it's really critical and key because it's one of the things in which people who are 21st century critics of John Muir said that he said some derogatory things about blacks within that particular journey. And since I am one of my little armchair hat and things as a genealogist, a scholar, and historian, but also a retired health professional. Um, in there, where he uses the term Sambo and he talks about the gradations, and he's describing the attributes of blacks and others who he came across. They were not in the pejorative modern 20th and late 20th and 21st century use of the terms. So his use of the term Sambo, which a lot of people seize upon, um, is just pretty much a misinterpretation. In fact, if you get an 1870 census and looked at how it classified people, and within it, it used the eugenic terms and classifications of races. And if you look and read the book, his journey carefully, he's talking about the shades when he's just describing people. So when he comes across the term Sambo, it's really just somebody. It's very dark. It's not a pejorative and putting down. Now, in one of his unpublished biographies, I mean, he definitely uses the word nigger, I think about 14 or 15 times. Um, and I tell people, given the time and the period, way less than Mark Twain in any of his books that are still available to this day. But within the vernacular, again, not of as a white supremacist, but basically this is, one of the things that they did, but it did elevate the white supremacist culture of that particular point in time. And a lot of folks seize upon that book as trying to say, well, here's more evidence of why he's a racist and what have you. And again, when people sling around terms, racism and white supremacy in the context of eugenics and the beliefs in that pinnacle and hierarchy, are very, very technical terms of facts. And one of the things that I will point out later in my talk, there were eugenicists, there were racists and white supremacists within the Sierra Club. And there were also folks earlier, the Audubon Society, that actually had eugenics type of classifications of people and races. But what you will find if you are a consumer and reader of John Muir, you would not find that in the man or in his writings and in his works. And so it's literally at this particular point in time in the wake of George Floyd that we really dip into the details of the man and his complexities. And I just think that when you look at his works relative to the works of David Starr Jordan or a Joe LeConte, you can clearly see, the break in the threads of a man who focused on nature. And it's because of white supremacy. It's because of these institutions that John just really folded in upon himself and became the advocate for nature's sake and the sacredness of nature, but also coming upon the great theories and the universality of nature and the connection of all things, that there was no superiority, but a culture of dependency, the interdependency. And that is something that I think that a lot of folks often miss about John, but something that really centered me on John Muir as I became involved and to say and engrossed in his readings. And again, for John, preservation of nature is not for nature's sake, but it's a moral imperative. And again, he's looking to it from the healing from the wounds of a war that rocked our nation. That what up until its day, we never had casualties on the industrial scale, the destruction on the industrial scale. So him rolling into the healing of nature and elevating nature above man's destructive capacity is something that's really key. And again, what I love about the quote that's within this painting, and again, it's from one of his 1901 books on national parks, and I think that again, this quote that you see there, it's again protecting nature, protecting the beauty and the ecological value of nature, and it's not just nature, but all systems, even humanity, as it's integrated within that. And it's following that thread. You see that this man, gives another little secret, because when he was doing his 1,000-mile journey, again, Henry David Thoreau was one of his inspirations, though he never met him, or at least there's not any evidence. But Brother Wood is on the call here, but I believe that they never met. But it is believed that he had Thoreau's works with him as he's making this 1,000-mile journey. And if you know anything about Thoreau, as not only was he also an inspiration and spiritual muse to Muir, but he was also a famous abolitionist in his own right, and and speaking out against slavery. So again, it's in the things that are about and around, and that's on his person, the readings that he's taken with him as he's having these experiences. And so I think that with this piece, it really captures the man, but it also leaves out some of the complexity. And I think that hopefully we can weave in a bit of that. Now, I threw in what I call my John Muir snark, because another quote that comes to mind, I threw it in this eternal conflict: the clearest way into the universe is through the forest and wilderness. And right now, our society is being deconstructed by the rocket man that wants to get us to Mars. I just find that I rest firmly upon this wonderful quote: is that, listen, man, I don't care about Mars, but if we want to get to the universe and talk about the universe, we must go through the wilderness. So it's one of the ways that even with the current challenges, I still rejoice in the fact that there are quotes that help us deal with some of the technical and tough moments and times that we're dealing with at the moment. Oh, so I talked about one of the themes that John Muir comes to, and that is, and one of his famous quotes is that says that when you're trying to pick about anything, you find that it's hitched to everything else in the universe. And this was his way, and this is from his first summer in the Sierra in 1911, page 110. And it says my microphone is muted. Is that the case?
No, we can hear you. You're good.
Okay, I because it's something that's on my screen. So okay, I will ignore that then. Um, and again, as I talked about his deep insight of nature and everything being connected, all species, all ecosystems, humanity, all things connected. I often, when I deliver that universality, that we need all these things in order to survive, and we need one another to be survived. And this is analysis that even Dr. Martin Luther King, and when we talk about this parallel syllogism, where all great minds come at a universal truth of the interconnected of nature, the interdependency of nature of human species. Even this is the message that even Dr. Martin Luther King wrote about when he talked about the inescapable mutuality and that all destinies are tied together. And this is more, Muir and King are even more salient now when we talk about what is the great existential threat that we're facing right now in our form of government and civil society. It's going to call upon a healthy democracy to protect nature, but also have a healthy democracy that's going to protect humanity, help protect one another. And these are two massive pillars that right now that I would say that we have to not only reflect on, but rest on these things that these two great men came at this particular universal fact at different points in strife. One post Civil War, but one during the height of the civil rights crises, but still very critical and salient to this day. Again, folks will say, "Oh, you're mixing the politics." Muir was not about politics. Muir was the most political of activists and leaders and organizers that you can ever imagine. It's just the issue of how sublime he was in his tactics and his methodologies that made his genius very unique. And I basically exploited, John Muir's actions. In fact, it's how I became a part of this organization. I needed to, in my organization, my activities to become an environmental activist and leader, uh, 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 I need to build an organization. And one of the organizations, since my community of Arbor Hill and Albany, New York, in the capital of the state of New York, was under threat and environmental degradation by a solid waste incinerator, where they burned garbage for an 8-county upstate region in the heart of a Black community. Basically, government and civil society failed our community. Our state government failed our community. And the organization that came to our aid and our assistance was the Sierra Club. And I came to the organization asking for help and attended a chapter meeting in New York City and talking about solid waste and figuring that it would be a home run. But I found that at that meeting back in the mid 90s that my race mattered. One of the first questions in the wake of the Fresh Kills landfill being shut down and solid waste being on the headlines everywhere, one of the things I figured that talking about burning garbage and where they burn garbage would matter and that poor people are vulnerable. And but the question that came to me from the grassroots members at that particular point in time, unfortunately, was why didn't I go to the NAACP? And I was turned down by the chapter at that time. But that gentleman that you see in the picture, Roger Gray, who, like I say, he was the norm. The questions of exclusion and the questions of as they say, who should the club support and how it should support, uh, that's always been a value with the club because the club is an entity that has limited resources and there's constant infighting over those little resources. And so the very vocal few can sometimes make a person coming from the outside feel unwelcome. And in the wake of how I was treated, that gentleman made that sign. Artists within the Sierra Club, they created a campaign and they came back to our community and says, listen, the chapter may not vote to support you, but the Sierra Club being a, by design, messy organization, the grassroots within our group and our leaders, we will come and support the community. And so despite how I was treated, they came and gave the first $250 check to a cause that would go on to shut down that incinerator, but also be part in the founding of what would become the national and international environmental justice movement. And around that time, as we wrapped up that lawsuit and that battle, I became a member of the Sierra Club, and I gave up my word to Roger that not only as part of their allyship, but I would join and become a member of the Sierra Club. And I became a life member of the Sierra Club. And that I also brought the best that I would, when I came to basically transform that organization to be, a diverse, inclusive, anti-oppressive organization. In other words, we will judge people by merit and effect and the environmental threat and risk, not by social constructs of race, etc., as I faced when I pleaded for help. And again, that gets back to that thread where looking at the inescapable mutuality, but how, as John Muir pointed out, all things are connected, and the solid waste that we dump in the environment, that we degrade the environment with, that we can't, again, we all are in this together. And that inescapable mutuality was very, very key. But I also want to lift up the fact that my family, a lot of folks, when they talk about the environment in the Sierra Club, they often, in the modern sense, see the environment and wilderness protection as white spaces. But I am part of, we talk about First Nations, indigenous tribes who lived on these lands before anybody came here, and whose lands were stolen. And I descended from forced nations. By forced nations, I mean people who were enslaved and brought to this country. And my ancestors during the 19th century, that's Caesar's Head behind me, and Caesar's Head was one of the first 8 ecotourist places that people, naturalists, would come from all over the country and around the world to visit to study flora. And this is in the lower Blue Ridge Mountains. And so my ancestors, Zion, it's over on the right of me in that picture, over my shoulder, they would basically take naturalists out into the wild to look for particular unique flora and fauna. So my enslaved ancestors were actually part of an ecotourist camp. So the irony of becoming an environmental justice pioneer and activist, but also becoming the 57th president of the Sierra Club, whose ancestry is anchored into the very discussion that would come later to rock the Sierra Club, but also that, again, the slavery, etc., and the freeing of blacks and making them whole citizens and being part of America. This is that vision that John Muir recognized. And my family are farmers. We still live on that land to this day. So not only am I a naturalist from my connections formerly with the Sierra Club, but always, even before the environmental work, my family, our land, by the way, in which we were enslaved on, still is in our land and is in our hands. And that's my daughter down in the Blue Ridge Mountains there on our family land from which we once were slaves on. But it gets to the point that a lot of folks, when they think of African Americans, they think of urban areas. But when we were brought here to basically shape the very land and flora and fauna around us. And we were very much a part of, my ancestors were very much a part of what was the early naturalist scene. But, our people were often hidden or erased. And people like Muir in his writings, where folks say that he degraded indigenous people. The fact of the matter is that he was one of the founders of something called the Sequoia League, which actually was the protection of indigenous people. And actually, he was respected by indigenous people. And a lot of writings in which they say he said this derogatory point about indigenous people, actually, he was describing whites and folks who were basically poor stewards of the land. And basically, it was his critique against his fellow white males and fellow white population and their stewardship of the land. But unfortunately, this snippets and pieces are often taken out of context when we talk about describing John Muir. And it happened, back in May 25th, 2020, when we had the death of George Floyd, and organizations nationwide started looking internally. But that's when, I guess, the national movement, but when I became president of the 57th national president of the Sierra Club, we actually did an inventory and analysis well before the death of George Floyd in 2015 and 2016. And Dr. Michael Dorsey, professor out of Michigan, I think he's now teaching out of Arizona now, He and several other scholars, we actually did an analysis of the literature, history, publications, as well as past board members and members. And we actually daylighted this well beforehand. And we actually began an effort and movement. In fact, the eugenicist Joe LeConte, who was also a founder of the Sierra Club, along with John Muir, whose name appears even on the early incorporated corporation documents. This gentleman, LeConte, he's not as well known today. We often hear about, Nazi Germany and Hitler, but people don't realize that it's the works of Joseph LeConte, that actually inspired people and inspired the eugenics movement, the modern 20th century eugenics movement, and racial white supremacy and scientific white supremacy. This gentleman, probably, amongst many, but he's within that pantheon of top thinkers and scholars who actually publish documents on eugenics and the notion of white supremacy that has still to this day haunt our society. The pseudoscientific notions that a lot of people still dabble in go back to Joseph Comte, but that was not an arc of what he brought to the club. The club was then, was like any other club, exclusionary, predominantly white, predominantly affluent, and it's basically connecting people to nature, but it wasn't a openly eugenics and advocating eugenics. So you won't see the Sierra Club advocating or on the efforts of what this man did personally and professionally as a scientist and scholar at a UC Berkeley. And David Starr Jordan, again, another prolific eugenicist and white supremacist. So we didn't have to wait for the racial reckoning in America. Sierra Club had already done this analysis back in 2015, 2016 under my watch. And so it really shocked me that on in May 25th, 2020, that the erasure or then the questioning of John Muir's legacy as a white supremacist and as an advocate of white supremacy and eugenics, the flip-flopping of what was the actual work of other founders and other board members was now being painted and smeared upon John Muir. So it provided for a very interesting and fascinating debate within the club. But here's the thing. And this is actually a document from when I was doing my 2015, 2016, and 2017 lectures as president of the Sierra Club on Joseph LeConte in educating members of the Sierra Club. Because when you talk about taking down an icon and a man that has contributed so much to science and natural science, geology, and the geological sciences. So, I mean, as I say, a clock is right twice a day, right? And so I think of Joe LeConte as the character whose clock was right twice a day. And one of his mentors and is Louis Agassiz out of Harvard. As I say, whenever you find something ugly and horrible, racist and destructive, you'll find somebody from Harvard. And right up here in the Altamont Helderberg Mountains, Louis Agassiz, when he was developing on eugenics, etc., he used to actually travel to the Helderbergs here in Albany County and look at the geological record with regards to evolution of species, but also flora and fauna, and again, advancing his thesis on types of species, but also types of mankind. So these people, and the reason why scientific racism became very powerful, this was the antithesis to what was then a lot of the abolitionist movement, the religious movement that backed and undergirded the battle and the freedom and the equality of all humanity in the eyes of God, even right down to our Constitution. So if you come up with a scientific methodology that says, well, wait a minute, we're not all equal. In fact, they're different species of mankind. So we don't come from a single source. and we come from different sources. And so this is where the scientific racism came in now as another argument against the religious argument of the universality of mankind, or the spiritual argument that we come from an Adam and Eve, our common creator, and we all have the inalienable rights. And so this Joe LeConte thesis and a eugenics thesis um, allowed for and tried to turn on its head the equality of African Americans. And by the way, Joe LeConte would go on to publish a book against Reconstruction and the expansion of rights through the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment to blacks. And so LeConte traveled the country, spoke at various states. In fact, New York State Department of Health in its archives, it has a eugenics section. You'll actually even find some Joe LeConte papers there. But that said, this is a serious argument. And here's the thing. I think that, you lift up the fact that two things can be true. He can absolutely be a founder of the Sierra Club who saw the genius in the geology and the study and the mind of a guy like John Muir, because he was very inspired by John Muir, but he also saw and provided, for and built for a lot of the academic support of naturalists, etc., in the works, in the analysis, especially if anybody's been to Yosemite and the granite dome formations there and the hypotheses of John Muir, that spoke to, at the scientific level, to a Joe LeConte. And so within that, there was that complementary handshake. But Muir never went the other end of taking up, lifting up, elevating the works and speaking in the talks and the theses and beliefs of Joe LeConte and Joe LeConte's theory of nature and people and species. And so it's one of those things that you find that there's silence on, and now a lot of folks who in the current 21st century and late 20th century said, well, the fact that he didn't say anything shows that he's a bad man. And the answer is that's nonsense. You cannot take modern sensibilities and modern analyses and try to project that upon somebody in the late 19th and early 20th century. You have to look at the early 19th and 20th century for what it was, and you look at the man in the context of history and time. Again, a man that's traumatized and sees the evils of mankind through a civil war. And he, yes, recognizes genius on protecting nature, flora, and fauna, has this relationship, but it's like a lot of us, we talk about the crazy uncle in the attics. And this man had some very crazy friends and partners, but you don't see papers or polemics of Muir against it. And basically, Muir sees a lot of these things and the consequence of these things, and he rolls even more so into nature and the protection of flora and fauna. And you just see him roll deeper, and to the point where it's viewed as a pathology, and a pathology that's not only critiqued later in the George Floyd movement, but it's a pathology that's critiqued early on by, like I said, the likes of Wendell Berry, that, he's so wrapped up in the trees that he loses sight of humanity. The answer is no, he hasn't. He sees the destructive nature of humanity, and that basically turns him into exploring, enjoying nature. But more importantly, he looked at indigenous tribes and how they were excellent stewards of the land, and he spoke to these things. And his trips up to Alaska, he was it's my old age is catching me, but he had an honorific title amongst the indigenous tribes about again, here's a man that was not against or pro I would say the notions like LeConte, but to him lifting up man's harmony with nature and looking at indigenous tribes in regards to that harmony, he actually respected that and revered that. And as indigenous lands were being taken at that particular time for industrial purposes, for logging, people like Muir, was one of the critical founders in the Sequoia League that actually protected those indigenous communities and actually did what he could. Again, his main role was the symbiotic stewardship and protection of nature, and he saw that allyship was more within that. Unfortunately, a lot of the works and the writings because of the Sierra Club, and because Sierra Club had members and volunteers and leadership like a David Starr Jordan that in protecting lands would absolutely engage and support policies by our national government, by the Teddy Roosevelts of the world, that would result in the loss of resources to indigenous population. That wasn't a Sierra Club policy, but unfortunately, you do have members in their careers that engaged in white supremacist activities and actions against blacks, indigenous communities that led to exclusionary policies. But the issue that people speak to, was this John Muir, or was this an extension of John Muir's philosophy, values, and beliefs? The answer is absolutely not. And you cannot read and enjoy any of John Muir's writings. You can absolutely lose yourself in the writings because you can see how he's lost himself in nature. And that's the beautiful thing about John Muir through his writings and the talent of his gift and his enjoyment and celebration and using nature to heal himself. We enjoy this man, his work, and his deeds. And it's through that I'm always inspired not only by John Muir's works, but the fact that he walked the razor's edge of our complex America, a nation that was ripped apart by a civil war, a battle over race. Remember, the Civil War was fought over whether or not the black should be a free and equal citizen in America. Full stop. And it was destructive. And you have this man seeing that industrialized destruction of man upon man, but man upon nature, and then the rise of the industrialist and how they were depleting our natural resources. And here was a man rising to meet the challenge and saying, listen, we're protecting nature for nature's sake. And yet he organized some of the most complex and amazing out. And he was very subversive. He got people like Teddy Roosevelt to come to very scenic, iconic places and spaces that would humble one to its soul. And if any of our listeners know what I'm talking about places like, Yosemite. You cannot go in Yosemite and not have a transformational spiritual experience once you go through and enter the valley. I mean, you cannot help but be transformed. And even me, a kid who annually travels to the Blue Ridge Mountains and thought that the mountains of the Eastern Range, again, nothing holds a special spiritual impact upon one's soul. It's like the finger of God came down in that space and you could see it. And you can be inspired by John Muir, but you can also see through nature how he saw how small mankind and humanity was, but also our role in being better stewards. And then it's within that taken that love of nature, but also that subversive activism of Muir and organizing and mobilizing people, not only just fighting for human rights, but fighting for our democracy. And within the club, it's understanding that it's the regulatory framework that Muir saw early on that upholds or protects our civil society. And I've worked with numerous national leaders, but also as John Muir during his presidency got President Teddy Roosevelt to come to Yosemite. During my presidency, I got President Barack Obama to not only come to Yosemite, but to see the impacts of climate change. And immediately after his visit with me in Yosemite, he would go on to become an even much more fierce advocate because he could see firsthand the ecological impacts of anthropogenic climate change. Again, not just fighting to preserve a speck of land, but now fighting to save the planet for all humanity, and making the arc of we cannot protect humanity, we cannot protect nature if our democracy, the most powerful democracy on the face of the earth, is also failing. And how fierce was that? I got jailed. I didn't do the Jan 6 thing. I did it civilly, but I still got jailed nonetheless for advocating for policies and politics that would not only protect our democracy, but also protect nature. So this is part of a cycle and a joy, and whether it's protecting the Hudson, you see my brother Bill McKibben, who wrote a profound book called The End of Nature. And what Bill McKibben's book, The End of Nature, is basically our planet nature's losing its own natural ability to heal itself and thereby protect us and protect that very fine fabric that John Muir and Dr. Martin Luther King talked about, that inescapable mutuality, and that once nature loses that ability to heal itself, we all come to an end. And so John Muir has left a wonderful legacy of action stewardship, but equally and more importantly, his words of healing, his words and visions of what we must do resonate now more than ever. Yes, he was a complex man. Yes, uh, he, by nature of the organization that he built, there were the ugliness of American society, then as now. Just as we have Democrats and Republicans, we often fight with these dualities. Uh, it does not reflect upon us because we have those associations and or parties, political parties that we're fighting against that want to end nature or see nature as an exploitable, exhaustible resource that can be privatized and can be owned. I, in the end, want to be like John Muir. And I, in that end, going back to that wonderful side, that led this off, and that, he said, the battle we have fought and are still fighting, for, the forest is part of the internal conflict between right and wrong. This photo, this image, that quote is the arc of the same fight that we fight every day as environmental activists, civil rights activists, human rights activists, LGBTQ activists. To save humanity, and in order to save humanity, we must also save creation. And that's the extra deep, as they say, plow trail that John Muir would dig. And so it's indeed an honor to lift up this legacy, to connect this legacy to not only nature, but John Muir was much more complex. And yes, John Muir, through his actions, his connection to nature, was actually raising a clarion call against the destructive capacity of humanity to not only destroy nature, but to destroy himself. And if I can now, with that thread, weave us into a new fabric and just keep John Muir's notion of the inescapable links that tie us all together, then I think my talk would at least touch a little bit more on, or give you a little bit more insight into that image of a man that was more than just ecology. He was always, in my heart and my mind, a deeper shade of green. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Like, I really couldn't imagine a talk that better encapsulates like this cross section of everything really that the exhibition stands for: art, advocacy, democracy. As you say, it's kind of beyond the scope of, yes, we understand Muir as an environmentalist, as a conservationist, but really the movement and his cause and his mission and the ripples out from his impact has touched every level of community engagement, democracy, American identity, and it really has. Oh, go ahead and if you're able to, Aaron, go ahead and stop sharing, and then we can see everyone's faces again.
Okay,
And
stop sharing. Okay, very good. I'm sorry about that.
And so, no, all good. So we have about a little less than 10 minutes. So I have a question, but I'd love to open it up to the audience for any questions. Let's see. For
I had a
instance,
question.
oh yeah. Who's speaking? I can't
this
see.
is Harold.
Oh, hi,
Hi.
Harold. Thank you.
Hi. I just want to make a comment and to elaborate on Aaron, your very good talk. But this whole thing I think really ties in with Bob Shetterly's artistry, not only for John Muir but all the other ones. Um, I'm the webmaster of the Sierra Club's John Muir exhibit website, and I put Robert Shetterly's image, portrait of John Muir on that website I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, a long time ago.
Yes.
And I've looked at all the other sites, the other people. And one thing that struck me about all the other people, as well as John Muir, especially John Muir, is it's so easy for us to say we have these great heroes of the past, these great writers, these people who are, amazing leaders and have titles and everything. But the beauty of John Muir is he was an everyday person. People don't realize I'm from California. He had a family. He had a ranch, had a loving wife, two children that he had, that his letters home just showed how much love he had for his family. Um, he was a regular person in a sense. He was great, but he was also someone who could show us that we all could become this. We all can be activists. It's the whole beauty of the Sierra Club. It's grassroots. We don't all have to become a elected leader or something really grand to participate in the movement. And to me, John Muir really exemplifies that. An everyday man who came to greatness through his writings and his articulateness. He used his skills, which happened to be writing in his skills. For other people, Robert Shetterly, it's painting. So everyone should use their skills, whatever they are, to protect nature, the environment, which includes all of human beings as well.
Well, thank you, Harold. Harold, that's a great point. And again, and he was an acute political artist, activist, and genius. Because again, we talk about, as one of the Sierra Clubs, enlisting humanity to save the planet, and Muir enlisted presence. He pulled in the elite, the 1% of the day, and remember, Teddy Roosevelt was about shooting everything that could move, and that would make Muir shake, but yet he knew that he had, again, he had to enlist this man, the most powerful man in the country and in the world at that time, to save the world. If I can move this man to at least give me this inch, and he got Teddy Roosevelt, found that kindred connection, and again, made Teddy sweat about about big game. You see Teddy turn to Muir and say, "What do you think about taking down a few elk?" And Muir would, "Oh, buddy." But the point is that the power at that point in time of the outing, which is a very everybody right now, in fact, the entire environmental movement, outings is an industry. Adirondack Mountain Club, it's a profit. But Muir used it as a political organizing mobilizer, because if you see it, if you experience it, you fall in love with you can't you're less apt to destroy it. If people could see that the very water that they drink relies upon a healthy wetlands ecosystem, you'd understand the genius of a Clean Water Act. And it's allowed people to politically come together. And so Muir was very adept and skilled at doing it. So I think that so there was a question whether or not we had the hands-off march. The answer is Sierra Club was at you had Sierra Club members at every hands-off active action. They've always been at the forefront of saving our democracy. That's one of the things I'm proud on when we talk about grassroots NGOs and organizations that are on the front line saving our humanity from its worst aspect. You can always find a Sierra Club member there. We have healthy and unhealthy debates. In fact, sometimes Harold Wood and I, we butt heads. But the point of the matter is, and thank you, Harold, for putting in the notes, the Alaskan tribe called him Tingit, which is the ice chief. So again, those who contribute and make those fine points. Again, if anything, Muir is a complex man. You would think that he was a 21st century man, but the fact that he was doing all these things at the turn of the 19th into the 20th century in one of the most, as I say, ecologically devastating times in our history, and able to roll back and use the power of our national government to protect nature, but also ecological systems and peoples, indigenous peoples, made him a man relevant to his times. And again, that image that you have at the Albany Institute of History and Art with that quote is as relevant in the 19th century as it is relevant right now in the 21st century.
So we only have time for just one more question, but this dovetails really nicely too with Harold's point about being so to speak, an ordinary person, and what impact can you make within your own community? How can you be inspired by Muir's legacy to make a difference within your own community? Megan asks, how best do you recommend interested parties in supporting Muir's legacy today? How do we get involved? Like we close out of this webinar, and what can we do?
Number one, become a member of the Sierra Club organization. And there's also one about David Brower. Well, David Brower is one of my 20th century heroes. He was the arch druid. And if you read any book, read about the arch druid. And again, David Brower is, he's he's a founder and builder of legal institutions, environmental defense. This man he was a member of the 10th Mountain Division. In fact, America's 10th Mountain Division would not have happened without the Sierra Club and David Brower. We're the ones that taught the American troops to do alpine skiing and alpine fighting, and David Brower was one in World War II. World War II. So if you go to see 10th Mountain Division in Watertown, New York, or out in Colorado, not only were they critical in World War II and in the Alps in Italy, they were critical bulwarks. So the Sierra Club is not only protecting the environment, but even when we had to rise to defend the planet against fascism in World War II, we were there. And all the more reason in the work field of David Brower, we need to fight against fascism right now and be like David Brower right now. David Brower would be out there in the streets, out there leading the fight, not only for the wilderness protection, but our civil society, our democracy. This is where, you don't have to have a gun. I'm not advocating violence, but I'm advocating the most fundamental art form that Americans have is the power to resist, to be the Minutemen and Minutewomen, to rise up against the threats to our civil society, against the threats that will tear down our institutions that protect our natural ecological systems, as well as protecting humanity. The threat is right now saving our democracy. We just have a different theory of change and protection of humanity than the other side. And we now need not to play around with those changes. We now need to stand up vociferously and say that this is not America, and these folks need to be, as they say, leveraging our democracy, voted out. And that requires us to be educated about our civil society and not turning a blind eye. Now is the time to get the crazy uncle and crazy aunt that are in the attic and the basements and get them proper medical help and institutional help that they need. But we must protect protect our society and protect nature and humanity at this end. So right now it's not a debate anymore. We now must take action in the spirit of John Muir and David Brower. Let us come down from the hills.
I can't think of a more perfect way to end. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. It's been really a pleasure to be able to host this amazing talk. Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you, Roger. Thank you to our partnership with the Sierra Club. And with that, everyone have a great afternoon. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you very much. This is very informative. I appreciate it. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.